Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching from, and welcome to our preview of the Sedgwick Product Safety and Recall Index for the third quarter of 2025. I'm Chris Harvey. We hope you're all ready for a very busy session today. Joining me are my colleagues, Sam Shaner and Matt Walker. All right, Matt, are you ready to review the data and insights from Q3?
Absolutely, Chris. It's crazy that yet another quarter has gone by and we're already in November. There were a lot of things that happened this last quarter, so we're going to have a very busy session here today. Sam, are you ready to get started?
Yes, Matt, as you mentioned, there's quite a bit to cover. And remember, this presentation is just the highlights. The full report has so much more.
That's right. The third edition of the 2025 Sedgwick Product Safety and Recall Index will be released tomorrow. It has more details than we can really fit into this one session. So be on the lookout for that. In this session, we're going to share highlights from Q3 as well as where each sector stands 3/4 of the way through the year. Be sure to download the full report for even more information, as well as an early look at the October 2025 recall numbers. Sam, do you want to walk us through the industries that we cover?
Thanks, Matt. I'd be glad to. The index looks at 5 industries in the US: automotive, consumer product, food and drink, pharmaceutical, and med device. We review data collected from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, and the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA.
And just a reminder, Sedgwick also does publish a European edition of a recall index. Our EU and UK colleagues, they will be hosting their webinar tomorrow, November 20th. The European index will be released the next day. We encourage you to attend tomorrow's session as well, just to get an overview of the regulatory changes in recall data going on across the UK and EU. To register, you can simply screen that QR code that you see on your screen now, or you can click on the link that's in the chat module to the side of your screen. But for now, we're going to focus on the US, and I'll turn things over to Chris.
All right, thank you, Matt. So let's look at the US recall numbers. So in Q3 of this year, the overall number of recalls decreased to 782 events, and that's compared to 861 events back in Q2. Almost every sector had fewer recalls this quarter than the previous. The exceptions were the pharmaceutical industry, which had the same number from quarter to quarter, and FDA food, which saw slightly more recalls in Q3. Now, year to date, there have been 2,418 recalls across all sectors, impacting a total of 470 million plus units. That's compared to 2,452 recalls in the first 3 quarters of last year, which affected 580.4 million units. So that means we're slightly behind last year in terms of both recall events and volume. But as we know, anything can happen in Q4. The total number of units recalled in Q3 across all 5 of the industries we cover increased by 200%. So 200%, from 85.8 million in Q2 to 258.9 million this quarter. So big jump. This is the highest quarterly total since Q4 of 2022. Every sector saw more units recalled compared to the last quarter. USDA food set a 13-year high with 58.5 million pounds being impacted. The pharmaceutical sector had its highest quarterly total since Q1 of 2023, with 44.5 million units being recalled. All right, Matt, what else is going on across the markets in the third quarter?
Yeah, Chris. So safety remained a top priority across industries in Q3. NHTSA, the CPSC, FDA, and USDA all proposed new regulations on everything from automated driving systems and lithium-ion batteries to children's toys, as well as meats. The FDA also called for infant formula manufacturers, suppliers, and distributors to enhance their product recall communications. More to come on that later on. In addition, several measures to boost U.S. production on a range of goods were introduced. These include aggressive enforcement for Made in the USA claims on consumer goods, a program that encourages new U.S. drug manufacturing facilities, and possible tariffs or quotas on imported medical device and personal protective equipment. Sam, what have you seen?
While oversight increased in some areas, regulations were lessened in others. The FDA indicated it would rescind a rule that would have placed more stringent requirements on laboratory developed tests. In addition, there are discussions about easing or ending the regulation for tailpipe emission standards in automobiles. The FDA also made it clear that it didn't intend to broadly restrict the use of PFAS in medical devices. Now, Chris, Should we take a closer look at each industry?
Yeah, so as far as the agenda for the webinar, we are going to begin with the auto industry. That'll be followed by consumer products. After that, we're going to highlight data and trends from the food and drink industry, medical device, and finally, we will round out with the pharmaceutical industry. We will pause at the end of each of those industry sections to take your questions and also share some insights from some of our partners. And then if there is time, we'll also take questions at the end. Just a reminder that the audience's microphones are muted, so you will have to enter questions into the chat or Q&A module. We'll also start each section with a question to test your knowledge, so get ready. You'll see a pop-up on the right side of your screen where you can record your answer. All right, Matt, let's jump in with our first question in the auto industry.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So anyone who's joined us on previous webinars, they know that the questions are multiple choice. Everyone's answers are anonymous, and we promise to everyone who's listening, we are not keeping score. So please feel free to answer what you think the correct choice is. So the first question, in July, NHTSA issued its report on research and rulemaking activities on vehicles equipped with Automated Driving System, or ADS. The document offers an overview of areas the agency is exploring. What is not one of the issues addressed in the reports? Is it A, the use of augmented reality objects to assess the sensing modalities of ADS technology? B, potential airbag deployment, injuries to children who are seated in what is traditionally a vehicle's driver's seat? C, ways to improve the efficiency of data reporting for crashes involving ADS vehicles? Or D, how self-driving vehicles may be designed to cater to passengers who use wheelchairs? Please make your selection.
Yeah, and while the audience is making their selection, I got to ask, I know Sam, Matt and I have talked about before driverless vehicles, and we're a little cautious about not jumping into that. But have you ever been in a driverless vehicle? Is that something you want to try and do?
I have not. I'm a little hesitant as well to do so, but maybe in the future. But right now, it's probably a no for me.
Yeah,
I will say, I will say that anyone, most of our listeners, attendees have not seen Sam's driving. So I don't know. It's kind of a toss up on the driverless or Sam. So, I don't know which is actually better there.
I'm going to let that be, Matt.
All right. We will give you the answer here in a little bit to our trivia question. But for now, I'll turn things over to Sam to talk about regulatory trends.
All right. The U.S. automotive industry continues to navigate global tariffs on vehicles, materials, and components. Automotive News predicts that the impact will be even greater in the second half of the year. A trade deal with the European Union set automotive tariffs at 15% for imports between the US and EU beginning on August 1st. The agreement may provide a little certainty for those trading partners. However, the US Commerce Department imposed preliminary anti-dumping duties of 93.5% on Chinese imports of graphite in July. The mineral is a key component in batteries. In addition, fees for semiconductors, another critical automotive component, were still being negotiated in September. And what some manufacturers may see as a bright spot, the Trump administration ended penalties for automakers who didn't meet the corporate average fuel economy, or CAF, standards for model years 2022 to 2025. Fines for not complying with these vehicle fuel economy requirements have cost major manufacturers hundreds of millions of dollars in previous years. The Environmental Protection Agency has considered extensive changes to these rules. The Federal Highway Administration issued new guidance for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. The changes ease some eligibility requirements and streamline how states apply for federal funds to build a national interconnected charging infrastructure for EVs. NHTSA and Congress both took steps in the third quarter to update safety regulations to reflect technologies in automated vehicles and automated driving systems. New rulemaking is expected to advance in the coming months. Chris, do you want to help us take a closer look at the data?
Sure thing. But first, the answer to our poll question. So the question again was, which issue was not addressed in NHTSA's July research and rulemaking activities on vehicles equipped with automated driving system reports? The majority of the audience actually got this wrong. The actual correct answer is C, ways to improve the efficiency of data reporting for crashes involving ADS vehicles. All right, so now we'll dive into the data. In Q3 of this year, NHTSA issued 215 auto recalls, and this is down 12.6% compared to 246 events we saw back in Q2. In contrast, the number of affected units increased by a little over 25% from 7.3 million in Q2 to 9.2 million in Q3. There was only one recall that involved more than 1 million units. In the first 3 quarters of this year, there have been 676 auto recalls involving a little over 20 million units, and this is lower by event and volume than the same period last year, which had 740 recalls impacting 24.5 million units. Electrical systems were the leading cause of U.S. auto recalls in Q3. They were linked to 40 events, which is down from 49 in the last quarter. Structure concerns were the second most cited cause, and they were involved in 24 recalls. Equipment issues was third with 23 events. Now, by volume, backover prevention systems were the leading recall category, with just slightly over 2 million units being affected. This included one recall involving 1.4 million units. Electrical systems ranked second with 1.6 million units impacted. Gasoline fuel systems were the third highest category by volume, with 1.6 million units affected across 9 different recalls. All right. One thing I was curious, Sam and Matt, I think all of us, even the ones listening, have had a recall on our vehicles in the past. I'm just curious, how quick do you act on any kind of automotive recall? I know myself, I've actually gotten a few over-the-air software updates, which is nice. I don't have to take it into the dealer anymore. But curious, when you do get that notice, how quick do you react?
So I am definitely not a poster child for what should be done. I've been in the recall industry now for 15, almost 16 years. I have a car that's actually from 2015, and it still has outstanding recalls on it. So I'm a notorious non-responder, which I shouldn't be, being in the industry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, so I would agree with you both. I'm a little delayed on getting those recalls completed, but the software updates have made it easier to get those done.
Good. I don't think you guys are too dissimilar from most of the U.S. at least. So all right. Now we're going to take questions from the auto industry. So again, you can enter those into the chat or the Q&A module. So just give a second to see. Okay, here's how will new safety standards for ADS vehicle impact recalls across the auto industry?
Yeah, I can take that, Chris. So I think first of all, anytime there are more standards that are added, there is a greater risk for violating those standards. I think that's understandable. I do think the new standards make it a perfect time for stakeholders. So whether it's the manufacturers, OEMs, to ensure that they have a robust recall plan that's in place. While reviewing that recall plan, it's always important to make sure, though, that any adjustments during the vehicle's design support the new requirements as well.
Got it. Thanks, Matt. Question did come in. How do you do the software updates yourself? And I think that really is just dependent on the vehicle that you have and that manufacturer, that OEM. A lot of times these vehicles are connected now. So I do know I actually get an alert within my vehicle, and then I just have to hit accept that I want to download the software and do the update. Sometimes it takes a couple minutes, sometimes a little bit longer, but it really is, I think, dependent on the vehicle, how connected it is to be able to do it. But it does save a lot of time. All right, I don't see additional questions, so we'll move on to consumer products. Sam, ready to get into that?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Let's start with a question. In August, the Department of Justice, or DOJ, reached an agreement regarding civil and criminal claims against a portable air conditioner manufacturer over violations of the Consumer Product Safety Act. How much was the civil penalty the company agreed to pay? A, just over $16 million, B, $9.8 million, or C, $28.6 million. Please make your selection. So Chris, while we wait, how is the planning for ICFSO?
Yeah, so I do have the honor of being the planning chair for ICFSO. And if you're in the consumer product industry, I highly recommend checking out ICFSO, International Consumer Product Health and Safety Organization. It's the premier product safety and health organization out there. They have their annual meeting in February, and lots of good things from different foundations for training, for product safety trainings, roundtables that are interactive, mock trial, a lot in the planning process. So I'm really excited to be part of it and looking forward to it. I highly encourage people to check it out, icphso.org. All right, over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Chris. So in Q3, the CPSC continued to issue safety warnings and conduct regulatory business despite being reduced to one commissioner, and that's Acting Chair Peter Feldman. One way the agency may try to do more with less staff is through the use of AI to anticipate product safety issues. The CPSC announced a final rule in August that establishes mandatory safety requirements for water bead toys and toys that contain water beads. The agency also said it was finalizing new safety requirements for infant neck floats. These actions show that the safety of children's products remains a high priority. In addition, the Commission advanced a rule that would set mandatory safety standards for micromobility devices powered by lithium-ion batteries. These standards have been on the agency's agenda for some time. The FTC stepped up enforcement of products that violate Made in the USA regulations. The agency declared July to be Made in the USA month and sent warning letters to both manufacturers and major online marketplaces, which may suggest a broader scope for issuing fines. Now, before we get into the data, let's see the answer to our poll question. So the question was, how much was the civil penalty in the portable air conditioner suit? Looking at the responses, the audience did get this one correct, so way to go, team. The answer is A, $16.03 million. This is the maximum authorized under the Consumer Product Safety Act. The company also committed to nearly $400,000, in restitution and pled guilty to one count of knowingly and willfully failing to report a product safety hazard to the CPSC. This was only the second time in history that a company has entered into a criminal resolution in a Consumer Product Safety Act case. Now we'll get into the data and I'll turn things over to Chris.
All right, thanks, Matt. So in Q3, there were 80 CPSC recalls, and this is a 26.6% decrease from 109 events we saw back in Q2. Now, in contrast, the number of units recalled, they rose by 7.3% from 12.2 million units last quarter to 13.1 million this quarter. In the first 3 quarters of 2025, there have been 290 consumer product recalls impacting just shy of 30 million units. That compares to 246 recalls involving 72.6 million units during the same time period last year. Electronics accounted for the most recalls by product category in Q3. They were linked to 19 recall events. That is one less than the previous quarter. Children's products were second with 11 events, and in third place was Yard and Garden with 10 recalls. Now, in terms of recalled units, Yard and Garden was the top category with 4.7 million units impacted in Q3, and this was primarily driven by a recall of 3.6 million garden hoses that posed a risk of injury from bursting. Electronics had 3.6 million units recalled, making it the second highest category by volume. Kitchen products were the third highest product category in Q3 with 2.4 million units being recalled. The combination of burns and fire was the top consumer product hazard by event in Q3, and that was tied to 10 recalls. Fire, burn, poisoning, and entrapment were all second with 8 events respectively each. In third place were injuries and internal chemical burns, which had 7 recalls apiece. And then injury was the leading risk by volume, impacting 4.4 million units. Fire was second by volume, connected to the recall of just shy of 3 million units. Burns were third and impacted almost 1.5 million units. The combination of burns and fire was linked to 1.3 million units, really painting a broader hazard picture for both burns and fire this quarter.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I know with everything recall, we're always looking at how do we improve response rates. When it comes to consumer products, you can get some data from retailers. You do have some data from direct sales, possibly from registration cards. But a lot of consumers, and I'm notorious for this also, don't fill out the registration card that you get with the product. How do we increase that from consumers? Any thoughts there on how that can be improved to get more registrations from consumers?
I mean, it's a hot topic. It's like you said, it's been proven that directly notifying consumers helps increase response rates, but a lot of times recalling firms, manufacturers just don't have data for that. So registration is key. I've been doing recalls for 20 years. I do not regularly register my products. But I think you've got to make it very easy for consumers to do it. QR codes when they get the product, maybe an incentive that, hey, you did register, I'm going to give you a coupon to get some accessories that are off. I think making it easy, but also just educating consumers in the marketplace. It's not just about giving your information for sales or marketing. It is for safety. So I think it's a combination of education and making it easy, but it's something as a whole, and the industry really has to look at.
Yep. So before we take questions, we want to share insights from our partners, Dana and Serena with Klein & Company US LLP. Preparation is key to an efficient and effective recall. There are several actions companies can take prior to a crisis to help things run more smoothly when a recall occurs. These include securing product recall insurance, establishing clear internal protocols for incident review and escalation, and implementing comprehensive systems to track product components, suppliers, and product batches. In addition, companies should identify key personnel across departments who will be involved in the recall process. These include the full range of operational teams, such as communications, inventory management, finance, compliance, and legal. Furthermore, businesses are advised to consider full and strong remedies in their corrective action plans.
Thanks, Sam. So you can hear more from Dana and Serena within the full published index. This was a snippet from their article, but always some good information there. So now we're going to open it up for questions in the consumer product industry. One, do you see the explosion of AI having an impact to recalls? I can give some feedback on that. I think everyone's talking about AI. It's always a hot topic at conference and other areas. I think most companies are really adopting it within their actual operations, but also looking at how can improve product safety. I know from a positive standpoint, the identification of defects or issues or hazards earlier on is a potential benefit, where you get all this data coming in for customer service, from social media, from retailers, and other areas. So the ability to look for those trends and identify these potential defects or issues earlier on so it can be investigated, I think is going to help in the use of AI for that. Now, there is concern about AI misinterpreting things, misinterpreting what consumers are wanting. So some of that could potentially present some issues, I think, that could lead to product safety concerns. I think companies are a little slow to get going with it just because of some of the privacy concerns and things as well. But overall, I definitely think AI is going to be a tool that's used to increase product safety, not only for consumer products, but other areas as well. Let's see. How do you think having one commissioner will impact enforcement at the CPSC? I can take that one. I don't think it's had a massive impact so far. There's a very active, a lot of recalls are occurring, although a new commissioner was just nominated. It still has to be confirmed though. So that actually raises some more question, because there was rumors about, will the CPSC fold under HHS from a budgeting standpoint, and then a new commissioner was nominated. So I think it's a little unsure exactly what the plans are, but we'll be keeping a close eye. All right, I don't see any more questions, so over to you, Sam.
All right, now on to the food and drink sector. First, our question: lead contamination in ground cinnamon continues to be an issue. How many new companies did the FDA add to its public health alert in September and early October for having excessive levels of lead? A, 12, B, 5, or C, 8? Please make your selection.
Yeah, and I know on a previous webinar we talked about, I do have a small infant son. He's about 6 months old at this point. So Halloween's just passed. He wasn't able to go out and go trick-or-treating. He was dressed as a dinosaur though, and he did help us to pass out candy. But Chris and Sam, I know you both have children. I'm just curious, are they still trick-or-treating first of all? And then if they are, is there a go-to candy that they each have?
I've got an 18-year-old that did not go out, and then a 16-year-old that was really excited for it, was out for hours. I think he got like 3 pounds of candy that I feel like was gone in a week. So I can't narrow down like one particular brand of candy because it's all gone. So yeah.
Yeah, so all three of my kids went trick-or-treating. We didn't stay out long though because they were all cold and got probably a third of the candy Chris's kiddo got, but Kit Kats are huge in my house, so that's what they were after.
Nice.
Nice.
All right. Chris, are you ready to talk about trends in the food and drink sector?
Sure thing, Sam. So food and beverage companies are facing a lot of policy and regulatory changes. In September, the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service directed its inspection program personnel to include gluten in their verification activities for major allergens. Even though gluten is not one of the big 9 major food allergens, establishments will need to accurately control and label it in the same way that they address established allergens. And this could result in big changes for food companies along with restaurants. In July, the FDA asked for more collaboration from infant formula, baby food, and children food manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers around recall communication for these products. FDA Commissioner Dr. Martin McCary laid out short and long-term goals to overhaul how the agency and the public are informed about in-market events. The Make America Healthy Again Commission issued its Make Our Children Healthy Again strategy report in September, and the plan includes more than 120 recommendations that would dramatically impact the food sector, including plans to eliminate the ability to self-affirm an ingredient as generally regarded as safe, as well as other ingredient and labeling changes. The USDA announced a new initiative to fight foodborne illness. The program includes more training for inspectors and more collaboration with state agencies. In addition, the FDA released the Reagan-Udall Foundation Roadmap to Produce Safety, summary report of the Produce Safety Dialogue. The foundation gathered input from more than 170 different stakeholders to explore ways to transform produce safety. All right, so now on to the answer to our latest question on the food industry. And that question was, how many new companies did the FDA add to its public health alerts in September and early October for having excessive lead levels? The majority, and this was close, most people selected C, and then slightly B was second, but not far off. The answer is B5. This may not be the end of the list, though. The agency does continue to monitor supplies, and more products may be added. All right, Matt, do you want to dive into FDA food recall data?
Absolutely, Chris. Thanks. So the number of FDA food recalls rose by about 1% in Q3 compared to Q2. The total increased to 145 recall events. This is the second highest quarterly total since Q4 of 2019. The number of units impacted rose even more and increased by nearly 76% from about 14.3 million last quarter to almost 25.2 million this quarter. Year to date, there have been 415 recalls involving about 110 million units in 2025. In 2024, there were 363 recalls impacting just 45 million units in the same time period. So pretty large increase, 25 versus 24. In Q3, undeclared allergens remained the leading cause of FDA food recalls with 48 events. The most common allergens cited were soy, milk, and nuts, which were each linked to 10 recalls. Bacterial contamination was the second highest cause of FDA food recalls in Q3 with 37 events, and that was up from 32 in Q2. Listeria was the most common hazard, cited in 23 of those recalls and impacting about 11.3 million units. Non-bacterial contamination had the third highest, number of recalls with 13. Bacterial contamination impacted nearly 13.3 million units, the most of any hazard in Q3. Undeclared allergens were second by volume with 8 million units recalled. Foreign materials were third and impacted about 2.65 million units, with most of those being tied to a single recall of yogurt that contained plastic. Prepared foods experienced the most recalls of any FDA food product category in Q3. There were 29 events, which was down from 49 last quarter. Produce was second with 22 events, and dairy was third with 18. In terms of units impacted in Q3, prepared foods led with about 17 million units. This included a recall of almost 10.6 million ice cream bars for concerns about listeria. Dairy was second with 2.6 million units, and that was tied largely to the yogurt recall I just mentioned. Eggs were third due to a single recall of 1.7 million units for salmonella. There were 132 unique companies involved in FDA food recalls in Q3. Of those, 6 companies experienced multiple recall events, with one of these recording 7 incidents, mostly due to poor temperature control. The remaining companies had 1 recall this quarter. Now, Sam, do you want to dive into the USDA food recall data?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. In Q3 2025, the number of USDA food recalls fell by 60% to 6 events. This is compared to 15 recalls in Q2. The number of units impacted surged from just over 1 million pounds last quarter to 58.5 million pounds this quarter. This is the highest quarterly total in 14 years. The 2025 total for the first 3 quarters is higher than the same period in 2024 for both events and units. Year to date, there have been 30 recalls involving 59.9 million pounds. This is compared to 28 recalls impacting 7.9 million pounds from January through September 2024. In Q3, the top reason for USDA recalls by event was foreign materials with 3 recalls. No inspection had 2 events, and bacterial contamination had 1 recall. By unit count, foreign materials was the leading cause of USDA food recalls, impacting 58.03 million pounds in Q3. This was primarily due to a recall of corn dogs that contained wood. Bacterial contamination was second by volume this quarter, tied to 367,812 pounds of recalled product. No inspection was third with 130,916 pounds affected. Pork and poultry each had 2 recalls in Q3. Fish and beef had 1 incident apiece. Pork was responsible for the most units recalled by product category, with 58.03 million pounds affected in Q3 2025. Poultry was second with 391,985 pounds impacted, and that was followed by fish with 98,916 pounds.
All right, thanks, Sam and Matt, for running through the numbers. I do have a question, Matt, for you. With your infant, what are some of the things you're looking for today in food safety, especially having a young infant at home?
Yeah, good question. So it was not really something that my wife and I gave much thought to, when he was first born. We've learned a lot though over the past 6 months from, when he has a bottle and if he has actual formula, you can only allow him to eat from it for so long. If there's any left over after 30 minutes, you have to discard it. That was not anything that we were aware of or I had even thought through. He's now moving on to actual like baby foods and things. So we are constantly looking at labels to see, what are the ingredients. A lot of times it's just like sweet potatoes and water. She and I have even started to make our own here, but that's going to become something that we're going to be paying more and more attention to as it goes by. Just trying to be as careful as possible for him.
Have fun with those diaper changes as you're experiencing the different foods and stuff. So
yeah, they've been fun.
yeah. All right. Before we take questions, we do want to share insights from another one of our partners. So next up is Scott Harper, who's with Euclid Crisis Management. So a little snippet from Scott's article. It is a common question: if another company caused the recall, shouldn't they be responsible for reimbursing me? In theory, yes, but in practice, relying on another party to cover your losses is risky. Even if a third party, such as a supplier, co-packer, or distributor, is clearly at fault, there is no guarantee that they will be able or willing to make you whole responsibly. They may not carry adequate insurance and could be underinsured or even insolvent. If they are based overseas, pursuing recovery could be slow, expensive, or legally complicated. That is why having your own recall insurance is essential. It is designed to respond to your losses regardless of who caused the event and without waiting for someone else to take. So good information from Scott. You can read more within the published article within our index as well. All right, so we're now going to dive into questions from the food and drink industry. So I'll give a second. Now, this question I do get a lot myself too, is with the rise in the number of food recalls, is food safety any less safe than it was in previous years? And my answer to that is I don't think it has to do, the rise in recalls has to do with a less safe supply of food in the US. I think it's increased technology, DNA sequencing, better lab testing. I think it's more auditing and investigation. So I think it's been a shift since the Food Safety Modernization Act of prevention. So you're finding things that potentially fell through the cracks, maybe in previous years, or you're finding things that may not have led to an outbreak or an illness. You tested positive, you investigate it before there is an illness. So I think that's driving some of the change here within the foods and some of the increase in recalls that we're seeing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Let's see. How should companies prepare for the FDA's plan to overhaul how the agency and the public are informed about recalls of infant formula, baby food, and food intended for children?
I can take that. I've been obviously watching this pretty closely. So, the first thing though I do want to call out is that a key change to that is the focus really should be on is communications and not operational procedures. So it's nothing operationally, it's all about the communication. So I think part of that though is the short-term goal being providing easier access, better access to parents on recalls that are affecting children's food products. They're also trying to improve data access to that. So that's the short-term goal. Longer term though, and this gets into AI, term goal is to modernize the way that the FDA looks at that and potentially using AI to look at that data. So I do think, with that, it's important for manufacturers and distributors to review how they're collecting and storing that recall data, because that's going to be a very important piece. We get into the longer term and see where improvements can maybe be made in light of the new FDA goals.
Got it. Okay. All right. I don't see additional questions coming in for food and beverage, so we'll move on to medical devices, and similar to the previous areas, we'll test your knowledge. So the question, while many other lawmakers are pushing for more restrictions on the use of PFAS, the FDA stated that certain types of these chemicals are well tested and safe for use in medical devices. In fact, the agency said that some PFAS are essential in certain uses, including pacemakers and other life-saving devices. So how many types of chemicals are classified as PFAS? A, more than 15,000, B, more than 5,000, or C, more than 150,000. So go ahead and make your selection. And while we're waiting for that, pertinent to the medical device industry, we are going to be hosting a webinar in December with a former FDA staffer, where it'll be just covering interview conversational style on how to engage with the FDA. So some useful tips coming from someone who was at the FDA for many years. All right, let's see, Matt, can you please give us some insights on the medical device trends?
Absolutely, Chris. So in July, the Department of Justice announced a settlement in a first of its kind lawsuit involving the False Claims Act that was tied to alleged cybersecurity vulnerabilities in genomic sequencing systems. The defendant, a global genomics company, agreed to pay $9.8 million. The case raises concerns about new risks facing medical device companies. In August, the FDA issued a notice to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, indicating it would rescind its final rule on laboratory-developed tests. The agency's move came after a U.S. District Court ruling vacated the regulation. The law would have moved oversight of this type of test from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services to the FDA. Many stakeholders opposed the rule, which would have classified laboratory-developed tests as in vitro diagnostics and imposed stricter regulatory standards on them. This is something I know we've talked about on a few of our previous webinars, trying to keep a look on it. Medical device manufacturers and suppliers may be facing new costs and more complicated supply chains. The Department of Commerce has launched a Section 232 tariff investigation into personal protective equipment, medical consumables, and medical equipment, including medical devices. Findings could result in tariffs or quotas on some imported medical products. the FDA announced the medical device user fee amendments for 2026. This lists the costs companies will need to pay for certain filings, such as de novo classifications, as well as 510Ks. The agency also issued guidance on the eligibility requirements to qualify for small business waivers on the fees. Chris, do you want to give the answer to our question and then share the medical device data?
Sure thing. So the question, how many types of chemicals are classified as PFAS? The answer is A, which the majority did get that one correct. So nice job, more than 15,000. The FDA stated that the type of PFAS, the types of PFAS are generally used in medical devices is different than the kind that have been detected in drinking water and then linked to health concerns. All right, so now we're going to dive into the data. In Q3 of this year, the number of FDA medical device recalls decreased by just shy of 5% compared to Q2. The total fell from 251 events to 239. However, the number of units recalled increased by 237% from 32.1 million to 108.3 million. So big jump there. That includes 11 recalls that impacted more than 1 million units each. So that's a high number. Year to date, there have been 726 recalls involving 159 plus million units, and that is much lower than the 800 recalls and 408 million units recalled in the first 3 quarters of last year. Device failure was the leading cause of medical device recalls in Q3. It had accounted for 35 events. Software concerns were the second most common concern with 28 events, and that's down from 44 the previous quarter. Third was mislabeling with 24 recalls. Products outside of specification were responsible for the most units recalled this quarter with a little over 33 million. These were primarily linked to a recall of 33.1 million infusion pumps. The second most common reason for medical device recalls by volume was no pre-market clearance, with just shy of 25 million units impacted. False results had the third highest number of units recalled with 20.5 million. The number of Class 1 recalls stayed the same at 36, which remains a record high, but the number of units rose to 50 million compared to 4.2 million last quarter. There were 196 Class 2 recalls, down from 212 in Q2. The number of Class 2 units rose from 27.8 million to 58.1 million. There were 139 unique companies involved in medical device recalls in Q3, and while most only had one recall, there were 30 companies that had recorded multiple events, with 2 of these experiencing more than 10 recalls each.
So Matt and Chris, I think you both just participated in a recent industry advisory board. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, good question, Sam. So we participated in a board for pharmaceutical and medical device, and the intent really is to get stakeholders together. So a lot of manufacturers, some hospital networks, retail pharmacies, distributors, get together and see, how as an industry can the process be improved. As you've heard, there are a lot of recalls. They do cause interruptions. They do have pain points. So how as an industry can we collectively look at making changes for the positive? How can we look at standardizing processes?
And I will say, just to piggyback on what Chris said there about standardizing, it's the overwhelming, response that we got from all stakeholders is standardizing the process as much as possible, from communications to, how they're notifying FDA to how they're handling products. As much standardization as possible is going to make it a lot simpler across all the different groups. So Chris and I will continue to have conversations and, see how we can affect some change.
All right, so before we take questions, we want to share insights on the medical device sector from our partner, Bert Snell with Curlin and Ellis LLP. All medical device manufacturers and marketers should be aware of the FDA's regular enforcement of AI best practices. The agency has issued warning letters to multiple companies over concerns that certain AI-enabled medical devices were adulterated and misbranded. In some cases, these determinations were based on marketing language contained on the company's websites. Companies that are marketing the AI functionalities of their medical devices should be prepared to provide the FDA with a fulsome accounting of the device's developmental processes and the manufacturer's plans to deal with foreseeable modifications.
All right, thanks, Sam. Now we'll move on for any questions. Please enter those into the chat or Q&A module. I did see a question came in about joining the industry advisory board. If you want to send Matt or myself just a note, there may be some opportunities based on stakeholder background, et cetera, and perspective. So just let us know. I think there is room for a couple more from what we know. So, all right. Even though the FDA says the type of PFAS used in medical devices is safe, does it raise liability risks for companies that continue to use it?
Yeah, Chris, I'll take that. So it doesn't seem as though the FDA will implement a ban on the type of PFAS that's typically used in medical devices. You know, I know in our poll question, we asked how many different, and it's 15,000 different types of chemicals that are classified as PFAS. But I think it's important that medical device manufacturers be aware of, you know, all of the possible chemical exposures in their products, even with that lengthy list. Chris, I think the question that you asked was specific to FDA, but I do think it's important to call out that the EU is also reviewing a proposal to restrict PFAS within the EU. I believe that there are some versions similar to what we're seeing here in the FDA that include an exemption for medical devices. But you know, any manufacturer or distributor who's listening in, they'll want to pay close attention to see what that final ruling is there in the EU as well.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Matt. I don't see any other questions specific to medical devices, so I'll hand it to you, Sam.
All right, so we've reached the last industry, pharmaceuticals. Here is your question for this sector. The FDA is working to more aggressively enforce policies around direct-to-consumer drug advertisements. In September, the agency sent form letters to virtually all pharmaceutical product application holders, directing them to remove any non-compliant advertising and to bring all promotional communications into compliance. It also sent cease and desist notices in response to advertisements for compounding drugs, including GLP-1 weight loss drugs, as well as FDA-approved drugs and biological products. Approximately how many cease and desist warnings were sent? A, 57, B, 100, or C, 145? Please make your choice.
And I gotta ask Matt, just staying on the subject of your infant. This is an interesting time of year where kids come home from school with colds and flu and everything. So I know yours goes to daycare. Are you prepared for that?
We've already encountered it. So he started daycare in August, mid-August. And I think that as soon as he started, he was sick. So he's been sick multiple times. I think over the course of the last 4 months, he's been sick like 2.5 or 3 months out of those 4 months. So yeah, we had to get prepared. We had to get ready for it immediately. Now, my wife and I, we were not prepared to also get sick from everything, but yeah, we've already encountered that. So
and builds up your immune system.
That's what I keep hearing. We're still not happy about it. But Chris, I'll turn things back over to you here to dive into pharma.
Yep, sounds good. So pricing and tariffs were key issues across the pharma sector in the third quarter of this year. On August 21st, the U.S. and EU issued a joint statement on a trade agreement committing the U.S. to apply the higher of either the most favored nation tariff rate or a tariff rate of 15% on a range of goods originating in the EU. Included on the list are generic pharmaceuticals and their ingredients and chemical precursors. The agreement was followed by an announcement from President Trump on September 25th, ordering a 100% tariff on any branded or patented pharmaceutical product unless a company is building their pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in America. Now, a few days later, the White House publicized the U.S.'s first most favored nation pricing agreement with a leading drug company. The manufacturer will be given a 3-year grace period during which its products won't face tariffs that other companies may have to pay as a result of the ongoing Section 232 investigation. For now, though, tariffs on other branded drug manufacturers are temporarily paused while most favored nation pricing negotiations continue. The FDA is looking to expand the use of remote regulatory assessments and other alternatives to in-person inspections. The agency issued a guidance in September that established a risk-based framework for the use of these tools to supplement or replace on-site inspections for pending drugs and biologic applications. There's also new measures to promote more U.S.-based production of critical medicines. In August, the FDA announced its FDA PreCheck program, which is designed to strengthen the domestic pharmaceutical supply chain. All right, so let's see how everyone did with that pharma question, and then we'll dive into the data. So approximately how many cease and desist warnings did the FDA send in September about possible violations of direct-to-consumer advertising rules? The majority of the audience selected C. Unfortunately, the answer is B, 100. The agency claims that manufacturers are not doing enough to ensure consumers are aware of all the potential risks posed by medications. They also state that many direct-to-consumer ads violate standards in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. All right, so now let's look at some of the numbers, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So there were 97 FDA pharmaceutical recalls in Q3. This is the same number that we saw in Q2. In contrast, though, the total number of units rose by about 137%. That went from about 18.8 million in Q2 to nearly 44.5 million this quarter. The average recall size more than doubled quarter over quarter, growing from about 193,000 to almost 460,000. Year to date, there have been 281 pharmaceutical recalls involving about 91 million units in 2025. That compares to 275 recalls impacting about 22 million units in the first 3 quarters of 2024. The leading cause of pharmaceutical recalls in Q3 was failed specifications with 17 events. That was followed by CGMP deviations with 15, and foreign materials were third, linked to 13 recalls. Mislabeling impacted the most units by volume with about 20.25 million. That included one recall of 20 million vials of penicillin G potassium. Subpotency was second by volume, affecting approximately 13.4 million units. Sterility concerns impacted about 4.8 million units, and that was the third highest total of any pharmaceutical risk this quarter. The number of Class 1 and Class 3 pharmaceutical recalls and units impacted rose quarter over quarter from Q2 to Q3. This quarter had 7 Class 1 recalls and 11 Class 3 recalls. While the number of Class 2 recalls decreased from 87 to 79, the number of units involved increased from about 18.7 million in Q2 to nearly 20 million in Q3. There were 58 unique companies involved in recalls this quarter. 23 of these companies experienced multiple events.
All right, thank you, Matt. Let's see here. Before we take questions, we're on to our next partner insights from our partner Stephen Harkins with Greenberg Trarg. A little quote snippet from that article. There has been an increase in Class 1 recalls in 2025, given the range of issues including regulatory changes, supply disruptions, and vulnerabilities in global sourcing and manufacturing. The threat of recalls will stay at the forefront of the industry's and regulators' minds heading into 2026. Product recall trends and risk mitigation strategies. Companies must maintain heightened vigilance in sourcing, production, and testing protocols, but the focus cannot only be on regulators. Consumer awareness and social media increasingly influence recall responses, which may be driven by news stories, citizen petitions, and non-traditional reporting. All these factors force companies to communicate more openly with the public and stay apprised of news and reactions from non-traditional outlets. So good intel there from Steve. And again, you can read more within our published article. Now we're going to open it up for any questions in the pharmaceutical industry. Again, you can enter those into the chat or the Q&A module. All right, let's see here. How might the FDA's expansion of the use of remote regulatory assessments impact recalls?
Yep, so Chris, I can take that one.
Okay.
Anytime the number of inspections increases, the risk of recalls rises as well. The more inspections investigators are able to conduct in person or virtually, the more opportunities to discover systems that aren't in compliance.
Right, I don't see any other questions coming in, so we will move on to really closing. So in today's session, we gave you a high-level view of the top recall data in Q3. There are a lot more details in the full Q3 Product Safety and Recall Index, which we're going to email to you shortly. This webinar is also recorded as well. You'll find in-depth insights from partners you heard from today, more information on the regulatory trends that we discussed throughout, and also a preview of the October 2025 recall numbers.
Yep. And as a reminder, the webinar for the European edition of the Recall Index is tomorrow, November 20th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. If you want to learn what is happening with recalls and regulations from the perspective of EU and UK stakeholders, please join our colleagues then. To register, please scan the QR code on screen or click the link that has just been posted in the chat module to the side of your screen. Also, if you missed our Australian webinar and index for the first half of 2025, they are now available on our website. Again, please simply scan the QR code on screen or click the link that has just been posted in the chat module.
Now, if anyone needs information for any of these events, you can always send us an email or make a note in the chat and we'll get you all the details. I do think we have time for a few more questions, so if anyone has any, please feel free to enter them into the chat and QA. But if you'd prefer to talk to Chris, Sam, or myself directly, you can reach out through the contact details that are on your screen now. We'd be happy to schedule some time to talk. You can also send us any questions or comments on today's session in the format. We appreciate everyone's time here today, and we look forward to seeing everyone again next quarter. But Chris, I'll turn things over to you in case we have any other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, Sam. So again, please enter any questions into the chat or Q&A module. There's a microplastic question. I'll take that one offline. But again, if you have any questions related to any of these industries, you can enter them into the chat or Q&A module. All right, Sam and Matt, I think the audience has taken it easy on us for this go around. I don't see any questions coming in, but I do want to thank you, Matt, for joining, and then Sam, for your first time doing the webinar. Thank you very much for participating with it, and then Matt and Luke behind the scenes who do all of the data and make this productive. With that, I do want to thank the audience for joining us. Again, if you have any questions, send them over our way. But thank you for joining, and everyone have a good rest of the day.